Louise Mead at Michigan State University and the Beacon Center for the Study of Evolution in Action. And I just want to give a shout out and thank you to Ryan for telling us all about how important it is that we should care about acceptance of evolution. And I'm going to convey why it's important that we should care about measuring acceptance of evolution. So I'm going to do that by comparing two instruments here, the MATE, which is what Ryan used, and another that measures acceptance of evolution, the IC. So the MATE is very, very widely used in the literature, though this doesn't need to be the case. And so I'm going to try and show you some evidence on why we might want to try and use some other instruments instead. And why we really, really need to care about measurement standards and exactly how we go about measuring acceptance of evolution or any other construct or idea in science education. So there's a whole bunch of instruments out there in the published literature. This is just 11 of those. And here I have them arrayed on their approximate psychological dimension and scope of content. And you can see that there's three instruments here in the top left that all address acceptance and over a broad all of evolutionary biology. And the size of this font is indicative of how many uses these instruments have done in the published literature. And so the MATE is by far and away what has been used. And there was actually just 2 days ago a new instrument that measures acceptance of evolution published, the GENE. So I haven't had a chance to read that yet, but I'm excited to get in there and read that. So there's a whole bunch of instruments out there. The MATE is by far and away the one that's been used the most. And the use of all these instruments has greatly varied in their adherence to measurement standards. So what is measurement standards and why should you guys care about that? So claims require data and data requires tools, right? The only way that we can make quality measurement inferences is by using quality tools to collect that data. And we should care about this in all of the sciences, but especially science education as well. And so we really need to adhere to these acceptable measurement standards. And so these two resources are some of these authorities on measurement standards. So to talk about them a little bit more, validity and reliability are the primary two that we're going to focus on. And validity is measuring what you intend to measure. And reliability is consistency across replications of a measurement procedure. And I'm just going to wade into semantic orders just a little bit here and say that a valid and reliable instrument just does not exist. That's not how you should use these terms. Though people use them all the time. And the whole point of this is really at the heart of why measurement standards are important. The instrument itself cannot possibly be valid and reliable. That's not the point of this. What is valid and reliable are the inferences that you draw from using an instrument with an appropriate population, which you have shown that instrument to have evidence and reliability for. So whenever you administer an assessment to a new population, you must give us some evidence of reliability and validity, or else we shouldn't believe the claims that you're making as strongly as we might otherwise want to. So measurement standards, here just talking about validity, there's 6 different sources of validity, and I'm referencing this paper by Campbell and Neame. I'm not going to go into detail about all of these by any means. I am going to describe 3 of these that are important for the MATE and the IC. And they include content validity, so does the assessment cover the body of knowledge that we want it to cover. Internal structure, which is that all are the items of the assessment capturing the intended structure of the assessment. So if the assessment is designed to measure only one dimension, acceptance of evolution, for example, then all those items should get at that one dimension. If it might be measuring more than one dimension, then it should have the appropriate framework to measure that the items are getting at each of those specific constructs. And then finally, external structure, which is that the construct aligns with external patterns of evidence. So for example, if we have 2 instruments, for example, the MATE and the IC, which both measure acceptance of evolution, then we should expect that those scores should be very highly correlated to one another if we give both instruments to the same students. For reliability, there's 2 that I'm interested in talking about here. And they include stability, so are the scores consistent from one administration of the assessment to another, and internal consistency, which is how strongly items correlate with one another. And internal consistency is usually measured with Cronbach's alpha, and it's very, very commonly used in all of the evolution education instruments, especially with the MATE. So a little history about both the MATE and the IC, starting with the MATE. It's 20 items, it balances positive and negative wording. It uses that 5-point Likert scale that we've seen in a couple talks now, from strongly agree through strongly disagree. And it was designed to measure high school teachers' overall acceptance of evolutionary theory. The authors did show some evidence of validity and reliability. namely content validity and internal structure, though the factor analyses that they conducted weren't the best, and some evidence of reliability via this Cronbach's alpha of internal consistency. And the authors did end their paper with a really important note that just seems to be glossed over in all of subsequent studies. They say, the MATE may not reliably and validly assess acceptance of other populations. Broadening the applicability of the MATE to other populations through further assessments of validity and reliability would increase its value as an educational measure. And this is absolutely right on. This is the crux of the matter, why measurement standards are important. But this was quickly, this guidance was not followed. So noticing that there were a couple papers coming out on using the MATE with undergrads, Rutledge and Sadler collected some evidence on the reliability of the MATE with undergrads, though unfortunately they didn't offer any evidence for validity. In these papers, they also proposed a 6-factor structure for the MATE, though that was never formally tested by them or anyone else. And they proposed some scoring categories, these different cutoffs from very low acceptance up through very high acceptance, in addition to generally suggesting that we report either summed scores across all the items in the instrument or report a mean for the whole instrument. And both of these practices shouldn't be conducted, and I'll explain more in a couple slides. So we had some questions about this at the end of Ryan's talk. The MATE has been used in 66 other publications and or evaluations. Across a huge range of population and instrumentation diversity. This is a little misleading. That should be 25 different uses in other countries, not 25 unique countries. I don't think Australia was one of them, to answer that question. And Ryan did mention about how prevalent it's been used in Turkey. It's been used a lot in Turkey, and in fact 6 independent translations into Turkish. So it's quite a lot. It's also been used from anywhere from 6 of the items out of the full 20, or up to 27 items, so breaking apart a couple items into multiples. And the 5-point Likert scale has either been reduced or extended based on the authors of these studies and what they think is needed for their new populations. And this is totally great. Instruments should never stay static and unchanging. However, we need to collect new evidence of reliability and validity to make sure that this instrument is operating the way we think it should be. This has been done for a number of these papers. However, unfortunately, when this has been done, it's almost always just internal consistency. So this Cronbach's alpha measure. And this is fine and good as long as we have other evidence of validity and reliability for whatever that population is that you're assessing. But if we don't, then we really do need to go ahead and collect more. Notably, the MATE has been critique content validity. Perhaps the MATE might conflate knowledge with acceptance. And the whole notion of acceptance is a little unclear for at least some authors. And the internal structure, so is the MATE a unidimensional instrument only measuring acceptance of evolution, or is it measuring other things, has been criticized by a number of studies, including most notably Wagler and Wagler in 2013. And I'll return to this study a couple times in the talk. So the IC is 24 items, and there are 3 subscales with 8 items per subscale. It also uses a 5-point Likert scale, the same as the MATE. And the goal, these authors' goal was to make a finer-grained instrument that would assess acceptance of evolution across these 3 subscales of micro, macro, and human evolution. They report the same evidence, same sorts of evidences for validity and reliability as the original MATE. Though again, this factor analysis for internal structure wasn't complete, but for a different reason than the original MATE paper. And it's been used for 2 additional populations of different sorts of undergrads too. So we use these instruments to collect some data ourselves. And so I want to present to you just a little bit of the data from these 2 university populations, one Midwestern US university and another Northeastern US university. And these populations were similar by a number of aspects. So we started with an introductory biology course, a biology course that focused on organismal, population, ecosystem level biology. So here's the methodological design for this study. We administered the MATE at both universities, and we investigated these common measures of validity and reliability, so internal consistency and internal structure. For internal structure, again, this is all about these items getting at the dimension that is the intended dimensional structure of the instrument. So we investigated a number of different confirmatory factor analyses, the intended unidimensional model, and also a couple others suggested by other authors, especially Wagner and Wagler. And then also an exploratory factor analysis to try and tease apart what the confirmatory factor analyses might mean. For the IC, we investigated the similar sorts of evidence, Notably here, it's purported to have a 3-factor structure, so that's what we tested for internal structure. And since we measured both the MATE and the IC, though only in the Northeastern University population, we're able to get at some external structure validity evidence. So are those scores very strongly correlated with one another? So here are some of these response patterns. This is the Midwestern University and the Northeastern University sample, all these different Likert scale categories. And I'm going to add on to this one of the original papers reporting the MATE with undergrads. And you can see that these distributions are largely similar. We've generally showing high degrees of acceptance. And they're quite different from that of Wagler and Wagler 2013. They have very high disagreement and also very high responses to undecided. So Wagler and Wagler is definitely showing an interesting case here. The unusualness of Wagler and Wagler's results here and all the analysis that they present in that paper are probably a unique case due to how interesting and different their population was from other populations that MATE's usually used to measure acceptance of evolution with. Their population was almost entirely female, Hispanic, and pre-service elementary education teachers, and those students were very unfamiliar with evolutionary theory to begin with. So we might expect actually that Wagler and Wagler is the absolute worst case scenario for using the MATE in the United States at least, which is really good. It's I don't want to say that the MATE is as awful by any means as Wagler and Wagler might lead you to believe. I'm also going to show you here the means for each of these distributions. And I want to do this with a great deal of hesitance because you should never ever show a mean of ordinal or categorical data like this. It just doesn't make any sense at all from a measurement standpoint, but everyone does it all the time in reporting results from things like these. It doesn't make sense because what we have here are ordinal level measures. We need to convert these ordinal data into interval scaled data, either through a Roche analysis or some other sort, so that we know that the difference between each of these categories is the same in order for us to take a mean across that distribution. But again, everyone does it, but we shouldn't do it. So here's the score response patterns for the IC, for the entire instrument, broken down by each subpopulation, and that's the mean. Because no one reports this, everyone just reports the mean, and I need to speed up. So luckily, here's all the rest of that data. So internal consistency, reliability, I obviously don't have time to show you the data. It's good. It's always good for the MATE. But that's besides the point because reliability is necessary for validity, but validity is much, much more important, and you need to show evidence of both reliability and validity. All the factor analyses for the internal structure are just super weird and inconclusive. Basically, we have no idea what the structure of the MATE is like. For external structure, this is a very preliminary analysis because I need to Roche transform these data so I can actually use correct measurement theory in creating this analysis. But without doing that, we seem to have a very strong correlation between the scores, so that's very hopeful. So now for the conclusions. No matter what your role is in evolution education, you guys should be, we should all be continuing this instrument development cycle, making all these evolution assessments much better. For the MATE specifically, it's very widely used. We have had a very lax adherence to measurement standards, but it's probably not as bad as some might suggest, especially Wagler and Wagler. And we should really consider and use other instruments that measure acceptance of evolution, specifically the IC, the EELs, and the gene, to try and get more data on these other instruments. So to MATE or not to MATE, I want to answer that question. If you've already collected MATE data, that's great. Report that data in a publication. Please try and collect evidences of reliability and validity and discuss the limitations of the MATE. If you're planning a new study, please evaluate the literature and consider using one of these other measures so we can go ahead and collect measurement standards for these other measures as well. And I really just want to hold all of us to the whole entire field to be accountable to educational measurement standards because these are very, very important. If we're making inferences from these assessments, then we need to know that our assessments are operating well. So I want to acknowledge the instructors and the students, Ross, Neil, and Suha, and come visit our poster to talk more. So thank you.